There is a room in Belgium where silence weighs heavier than history, a quiet chamber in Bouchout Castle, wrapped in ivy, where sunlight spills over faded tapestries and the scent of old wood lingers in the air. Visitors rarely see it, and yet, once upon a time, this room held a presence so vast that it seemed to contain empires within its walls. A woman sat there, alone, as the years passed like slow rivers. Her name was Carlota of Mexico, born Princess Charlotte of Belgium, a child of kings and a queen in waiting, who would become an empress without an empire, a wife without a husband, a ruler without a throne. Her life was not ordinary. It was a series of collapses, of illusions shattered, of ambition crushed under the weight of politics she could not control. And yet, for all the tragedy, for all the madness that history remembers, there remains something undeniable about her. Intelligence, charm, courage, and a will to act even when the world itself turned against her. This is not merely the story of a woman who went mad. It is the story of an empire that died before she did, and of a woman who refused to die with it. There is a certain stillness to royal childhoods, a quiet punctuated by protocol, lessons, and observation. But even among princesses, some are born with a fire that cannot be tamed by etiquette or expectation. Charlotte of Belgium, later known as Carlota, Empress of Mexico, was such a child. She was born in 1840 into the newly established Kingdom of Belgium. Her father, King Leopold I, was a man of formidable intellect and immense ambition, a former German prince who had been offered a crown in a land struggling to assert itself on the European stage. Leopold understood power as a game of precision, alliances to be measured, marriages to be negotiated, appearances to be curated. To him, Charlotte was never simply a daughter. She was a vessel of diplomacy, a bridge to other royal houses, and a symbol of Belgium's legitimacy among Europe's entrenched monarchies. Her mother, Queen Louise, brought warmth and gentleness, yet her life was short. Charlotte was only 10 when Louise died, leaving her in a court where ceremony and duty eclipsed affection. In those formative years, Charlotte learned early that survival in royal life required discipline, intelligence, and self-reliance. She mastered multiple languages: French, Dutch, German, Italian, English, not merely as tools of communication, but as instruments of power. Every phrase she learned was a brick in the wall of her future authority. Her education was rigorous. Tutors drilled her in history, politics, literature, and the arts. She read not only fairy tales, but the biographies of rulers, generals, and philosophers. She observed her father negotiating treaties with monarchs and ambassadors, watching the subtle language of power unfold. From an early age, she internalized a truth that would guide her life, that the world of royalty was a stage, and those who could act intelligently, gracefully, and decisively were the ones who survived. Yet Charlotte's brilliance was accompanied by solitude. She was not a child spoiled with constant attention or indulgence. She was trained to observe, to calculate, and to anticipate. Her diaries reveal a young girl who understood herself in ways far beyond her years, describing herself as a soldier of duty. In quiet moments, she would retreat to the palace library, immersing herself in books, dreaming of a life where her intelligence could shape destiny rather than merely follow orders. The Belgian court was a world of contrasts. On one hand, it was filled with ceremony, beauty, and the trappings of monarchy. On the other, it was governed by cold calculation, where feelings were measured against duty and personal desires were secondary to political necessity. Charlotte navigated this world with acute awareness, learning to mask emotion behind decorum, to smile even when lonely, and to listen even when she disagreed. Her observation skills became her shield, and her intelligence her weapon. Charlotte's childhood also planted the seeds of ambition and independence that would define her adult life. She admired her father's intellect and strategic mind, but she saw the limitations of male-dominated power. Women in her court were often ornamental, expected to charm, marry, and produce heirs. Yet Charlotte was not content to simply follow these rules. She absorbed knowledge, sharpened her mind, and nurtured a confidence in her own judgment that would later clash with the rigid hierarchies of Europe and Mexico alike. At 16, Charlotte's life shifted in ways both exhilarating and foreboding. Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian of Austria, the younger brother of Emperor Franz Joseph, entered her world. Tall, handsome, and imbued with a gentle, reflective charm, Maximilian appeared to offer a path away from the emotional austerity of her childhood. For Charlotte, he was not merely a prospective husband. He was a promise of partnership, a mind to challenge her, a heart that might share her dreams. Yet even in this early encounter, the shadows of her future were visible. Maximilian was gentle but indecisive, idealistic but untested. Charlotte was intelligent, ambitious, and unusually perceptive. Their personalities, though complementary, were also misaligned. The young princess sensed the potential for both joy and heartbreak, a premonition she would confront time and again. Charlotte's courtship was a delicate dance, blending youthful excitement with political calculation. Every word she spoke, every glance she offered, was measured. Her family observed her closely, knowing that her choice of spouse would shape Belgium's alliances for decades. And Charlotte, for all her youth, understood the stakes. She was no ordinary girl, swept away by romance. She was a future queen, trained to navigate the intersections of duty, love, and strategy. By the time she was 17, Charlotte had not only mastered the languages and manners of Europe, but also the subtle art of influence. Her education, her observation, and her innate intelligence gave her a confidence beyond her years. When she married Maximilian in 1857, she did so with a clear understanding of both the possibilities and the dangers that lay ahead. She was not merely a bride. She was a partner in a project of ambition, a mind prepared to navigate the complexities of love, politics, and empire. Even as a young woman, Charlotte carried herself with a presence that was both commanding and graceful. Courtiers noted her poise, diplomats admired her intellect, and family members recognized her potential. But behind the elegance was a mind constantly at work, calculating, observing, preparing. She knew that life would not always be kind, that alliances could fail, and that the world would often demand more than she was willing to give. Yet she also knew that she was capable, more capable than most, and that one day she would need every skill, every lesson, and every ounce of determination her Belgian childhood had instilled. In many ways, Charlotte's formative years were a crucible. They honed her intellect, sharpened her ambition, and taught her the profound costs of duty. They also shaped her loneliness, the sense that she must rely on herself, that affection would always be conditional, and that the world she inhabited valued protocol over heart. These lessons would follow her across continents, through marriage, empire, and exile, leaving traces in every letter, every decision, and every act of courage she would later perform. By the end of her Belgian childhood, Charlotte was no longer merely a princess. She was a strategist, a diplomat, and a woman capable of extraordinary resilience. She was prepared for a life that demanded brilliance and fortitude. And yet, even the sharpest mind can be tested in ways no education can anticipate. Her journey from the quiet halls of Belgium to the grandeur and tragedy of Mexico was beginning, and the lessons of her youth would be both her armor and her burden. By the early 1860s, Mexico had endured decades of unrest. The country oscillated between liberal and conservative governments, punctuated by coups, foreign interventions, and civil wars. For European eyes, it seemed a land of promise and peril in equal measure. Conservatives sought stability and a monarch. Liberals saw only the chains of foreign domination. Napoleon III, keen to expand French influence, saw the perfect opportunity. A European couple whose ambitions could serve his imperial designs. To Charlotte, the offer was intoxicating. She was not content to be ornamental. She wanted influence, purpose, action. She imagined a Mexico that could be shaped by her intellect. A liberal empire, respectful of local customs, yet guided by European sophistication. It was audacious, perhaps impossible, but in her mind, the risk was worth the potential glory. Maximilian hesitated. He loved Europe, its traditions, its familiar routines. Mexico was far, distant, uncertain. Charlotte's ambition, however, left no room for doubt. She encouraged, cajoled, persuaded. She wrote letters filled with logic, strategy, and vision. She mapped out plans for education reform, judicial systems, and economic policies. To her, this was more than a throne. It was a mission. In April 1864, they departed Europe amid fanfare, their journey a mixture of political theatre and genuine hope. Crowds cheered, but few understood the magnitude of what awaited them. Upon arrival, the empire they inherited was more theatre than reality. Conservative nobles, skeptical local elites, and foreign powers watched, evaluating whether these European newcomers could truly govern a nation scarred by centuries of turmoil. Carlota immediately distinguished herself. Fluent in Spanish within months, she attended council meetings, advised ministers, and scrutinized policy. She did not simply sit beside Maximilian. She acted, spoke, and demanded respect. The conservative elite admired her discipline and poise. Diplomats acknowledged her intelligence. Even skeptics found her formidable. Yet the empire was fragile. Republicans, loyal to Benito Juárez, refused to recognize their rule. Liberals deemed Maximilian a puppet. Rural regions remained loyal to Juárez. And above all, Napoleon III controlled the army that maintained their fragile power. Every decision Carlota made was a balancing act. Every step forward risked catastrophe. She traveled widely, meeting regional leaders, listening to grievances, and studying Mexico's social and cultural fabric. She sought to understand local customs, religious sentiments, and economic needs. She wrote memos and letters daily, not as a ceremonial empress, but as a strategist, a diplomat, and an administrator. Yet every effort revealed the limitations imposed by foreign power. For all her preparation, the empire was built on borrowed strength, fragile alliances, and foreign guns. By 1866, the first cracks in the Mexican Empire were no longer subtle. They were glaring. Napoleon III had made a decision that would seal the fate of the young empress and her husband. The French troops would be withdrawn. The United States, now reunited after its civil war, had warned repeatedly that any European military presence in Mexico was a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. Napoleon, pragmatic and cautious, chose his empire in Europe over a distant kingdom across the ocean. Carlota received the news with disbelief and horror. She summoned Maximilian in their private chambers at Chapultepec Castle. "Maximilian," she said, her voice trembling yet firm, "if Europe has placed this crown upon your head, then Europe must uphold it. We cannot allow our people to be abandoned. We will not fail." Maximilian, ever cautious, hesitated. "Charlotte, we have done all we can. Our empire depends on French arms, and now they leave. What can we do?" Charlotte's eyes blazed with determination. "We fight with every tool we have, Maximilian. We fight with diplomacy, with reason, with courage. I will not sit idle while the empire dies. And so she made a decision that few women in her position had ever dared. She would leave her husband, sail to Europe alone, and plead for support from the very powers that had orchestrated their rise. Her first stop was Paris. The streets, lined with banners celebrating Napoleon III, were a stark contrast to the turmoil she carried in her heart. In a formal audience, she spoke rapidly, switching between French, German, and Italian, laying out the strategy she believed Europe had abandoned. Your Majesty, Mexico is not a failed venture. It is a nation with potential, with loyalty to the crown, with a people ready for enlightened rule. Abandoning it now is not only a betrayal, it is a stain upon France's honor. Napoleon listened politely, nodded occasionally, and then refused. He cited political reality, the risk of confrontation with the United States, and France's domestic concerns. Charlotte left Paris deeply shaken but unbroken. Next came Vienna, where she sought the counsel of her brother, King Leopold II, and her brother-in-law, Emperor Franz Joseph. The reception was polite, almost sympathetic, but ultimately fruitless. Franz Joseph, protective of his empire and wary of foreign entanglements, refused to send troops. Charlotte's meticulous letters, her passionate speeches, her strategic maps, all fell on ears trained to hear duty over ambition. Finally, Rome. She believed the Vatican might persuade European powers to intervene. She arrived with hope, but the ancient corridors of the papal palace became her cage. Hours stretched into days. She refused food and water. Servants whispered about her strange behavior. Priests tried to coax her from her room, but she would not emerge. She imagined assassins behind every door, poison in every goblet. She wrote letters that spiraled from precise analysis of treaties to fevered warnings of conspiracies. Here, her mind began to unravel. Meanwhile, in Mexico, Maximilian's situation deteriorated. Republican forces led by Benito Juárez advanced relentlessly. Local conservatives wavered in loyalty. Offers of escape were made but refused. Maximilian, proud and principled, chose to face his fate. In June 1867, he was captured at Querétaro and executed. Charlotte, trapped in Europe, remained unaware. Her empire had collapsed, her husband had died, and yet she continued to plead, to write, to act as if salvation was still possible. By the time Charlotte returned to Belgium in 1867, she was no longer the ambitious young princess who had sailed across the Atlantic with dreams of building a liberal empire. She returned a woman shattered by betrayal, isolation, and grief. The world she had tried to govern had abandoned her, and her husband had been executed before she could intervene. Her empire had vanished, leaving only her memories and relentless sense of duty. Bouchout Castle, a quiet estate surrounded by forests, ponds, and meticulously maintained gardens, became her sanctuary and her prison. Here, she would spend the rest of her life, decades of solitude that would stretch into 6 long decades, a period during which Europe itself changed beyond recognition. Charlotte's mental state was a patchwork of lucidity and delusion. Some mornings, she would wander through the gardens, walking the cobbled paths with the poise of an empress, speaking to Maximilian as though he were beside her. She would announce policy decisions, comment on European events, or dictate letters to imaginary ministers in Mexico. She believed her correspondence could influence the course of history, that if she worked diligently enough, the empire might somehow be restored. Other days, she was consumed by fear. Servants described her as refusing food, convinced that poisoned meals were placed before her. Curtains hid invisible assassins. Mirrors reflected conspiracies. Every visitor was suspected. Yet even in the midst of paranoia, flashes of her former brilliance shone through. She could recite treaties from memory, offer sharp critiques of European politics, and recall events in Mexico with startling precision. Her intellect remained intact, even as her perception of reality became fragile. Charlotte structured her days meticulously, a reflection of the disciplined upbringing she had received at the Belgian court. She rose early, walked through the gardens, tended to her flower beds as if preparing for a diplomatic audience, and catalogued her documents with painstaking care. The castle itself became a reflection of her inner life, a stage where she reigned over an empire that existed only in memory. Rooms were offices, corridors became council chambers, and portraits of Maximilian were treated as active participants in her daily routines. The castle was filled with echoes of her past, furniture arranged to mirror the halls of Miramar, tapestries reminiscent of Mexican landscapes, and books from every country she had visited. She kept meticulous notes and letters that demonstrated her continued engagement with politics, literature, and art. She studied developments in Europe, commented on the shifting allegiances of monarchs, and wrote letters of counsel to politicians and diplomats. Though none reached their intended recipients, her family monitored her carefully. Visits were brief, controlled, and measured to avoid overstimulation. Yet Charlotte's mind remained extraordinarily active. Diaries, letters, and notes reveal a woman who lived simultaneously in the past, the present, and a world she imagined might still exist. She conversed with Maximilian as if he were alive, debated political strategy with invisible advisors, and meticulously catalogued events around her. Despite her confinement, Charlotte retained moments of astonishing clarity. Visitors occasionally reported that she could be charming, articulate, and politically astute. She could engage in detailed analysis of European events, recall diplomatic affairs, and offer opinions that reflected deep intelligence. These moments, however, were fleeting. They were swallowed by the tides of paranoia, obsession, and delusion. As decades passed, the world around her changed profoundly. Wars, revolutions, and the collapse of empires reshaped Europe. Belgium itself evolved politically and socially, yet Charlotte remained, a living relic of the era of monarchy and empire, isolated within her castle walls. She survived the fall of empires, the deaths of family members, and the erasure of the empire she had once sought to save. Her daily existence became a ritual. She dressed meticulously, maintaining the poise of an empress, arranged her meals with precision, and engaged in conversations with the ghosts of her past. She maintained a network of correspondence, reaching out to individuals who might remember Mexico or Maximilian, and she devoted herself to reading, memorization, and reflection. Bouchout Castle became her universe, a place where she could exercise authority and intellect, even if only in imagination. It was both her sanctuary and her cage, a stage for a mind that refused to succumb entirely to despair. Here, she would live for 6 decades, bearing witness to the rise and fall of the world around her while remaining largely untouched by it. Charlotte's story is not merely one of personal tragedy. It is a testament to the enormous human cost of ambition, loyalty, and political responsibility. She survived the collapse of her empire, the death of her husband, and the indifference of Europe, outliving nearly everyone who had once influenced her destiny. Her life serves as a case study in the immense pressures placed on women of power in the 19th century and the extraordinary resilience required to endure them. Her letters, diaries, and notes offer a rare window into her mind, revealing a woman who combined brilliance with vulnerability. She acted decisively when opportunity presented itself, navigating diplomatic corridors, pleading with emperors, and attempting to influence military and political decisions. Yet the structures around her, male-dominated, politically rigid, and focused on their own interests, were not designed to accommodate a woman of such intellect and determination. Charlotte's breakdown was not a sign of weakness. It was the inevitable consequence of impossible expectations. She had been trained to be a diplomat, a ruler, and a supporter of monarchy. She had been elevated to empress of a foreign land, charged with stabilizing a nation she barely knew, and then abandoned by the very powers that had empowered her. The pressures she endured were extraordinary, and her response, both her persistence and eventual mental collapse, was a reflection of her commitment, intelligence, and humanity. Her legacy is paradoxical. She was an empress without an empire, a ruler without subjects, and a wife without a husband. Yet she carried herself with dignity, maintaining the routines and rituals of authority within Bouchout Castle. She demonstrated that power is not only exercised in courts and battlefields, but also in survival, endurance, and the ability to maintain identity amid profound loss. Charlotte outlived Maximilian, Benito Juárez, Napoleon III, Franz Joseph, and nearly all of her contemporaries. She witnessed the collapse of monarchies, the rise of modern nation-states, and the reshaping of Europe's political landscape. Yet she remained a living monument to the human cost of empire, the fragility of political dreams, and the endurance of spirit. Her story reminds us that history is not written solely by those who succeed. It is also shaped by those who endure, who fight against impossible odds, and who bear witness to the consequences of political ambition. Charlotte's life is a study in resilience, intelligence, and the complex interplay between personal desire and historical forces. She died in 1927, aged 86, at Bouchout Castle. Her passing marked the end of an era, the last living link to the Mexican Empire, a reminder of the human lives entwined with political power, ambition, and betrayal. Her story endures as a testament to the costs of empire, the strength of the human spirit, and the enduring complexity of ambition. Charlotte's life offers lessons that transcend time, the consequences of unchecked political power, the fragility of dreams, and the courage required to persevere when the world abandons you. She reminds us that ambition can be both noble and perilous, loyalty can demand extraordinary sacrifice, and survival itself can be a form of triumph. Even in her final years, Charlotte's presence was felt. She remained a symbol of dignity, intelligence, and endurance, a woman whose life bridged 2 centuries, who experienced the heights of power and the depths of despair, and who refused to allow her story to end quietly. Her life was a monument, not only to ambition and loyalty, but to the endurance of a human spirit that could survive unimaginable loss and witness history's relentless march. Thanks for watching. If you loved learning about Carlota and want to see more stories like hers, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and click the bell. There's a lot more forgotten history coming your way.